Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So Theresa May held her first cabinet meeting this morning. Later, she faces her backbench MPs at a meeting of the Conservative 1922 committee. It looks like there's no immediate plan to oust her. So how will this minority government go about governing? Well, when the dust settled after election night, the Conservatives ended up with 318 seats and Labour with 262. All other parties combined took 70 seats, 10 of which were won by the DUP, who've been courted by the Conservatives for a so-called confidence and supply arrangement. When one subtracts Sinn Féin MPs who don't take their seats in the Commons and the Speaker and Deputy Speakers who traditionally don't vote, the effective working majority for a Conservative government that can rely on DUP votes is 13. Over the weekend, Theresa May set about reshuffling her cabinet. Damien Green was elevated from Work and Pension Secretary to First Secretary of State, effectively Theresa May's new deputy. He was replaced as the man in charge of welfare policy by long-time Treasury Minister David Gauke. And it was a return to the top table for one-time leadership contender Michael Gove, who takes on the environment portfolio, while his fellow Leave campaigner Andrea Leadsom moved across to become the new leader of the House of Commons. Liz Truss, who many had thought had something of a torrid time at the Justice Department, became the new Chief Secretary to the Treasury and was replaced as Justice Secretary and Lord Chancellor by David Lidington. So as Theresa May prepares to face down her party at the 1922 committee tonight, all attention among her reorganised staff will be on crafting a Queen's speech for next Monday. MPs will vote on its contents on the 27th of June. That will count as the new minority government's first parliamentary test. Grant Shapps, what went wrong?
The manifesto, clearly. I mean, that was the big issue on the doorstep.
Specifically the social care policy?
Care, specifically. I think you can do a certain number of unpopular things and, you know, people will say, OK, we understand you're taking tough decisions. So maybe that was the pension triple lock moving to a double lock. But I don't think you can do everything. And what this manifesto tried to do in the kind of name of responsibility, fiscally solving long-term problems, was try to do everything. And I think that was a mistake. And
was it arrogant?
I think it was born out of now departed from Downing Street, some advisors who weren't best at taking advice and certainly didn't ask people who really would know about things like long-term care sufficiently in advance with, for example, ministers not being involved.
But isn't it Theresa May's responsibility? She's the one who hires those advisors and she's the one who took their advice. It can't all be laid at their door. I
think in the end, of course, a good leader has to take responsibility for what happens. And I very much hope that when Theresa May comes to the 1922 this evening, so she's going to come and speak to the Conservative MPs, that she doesn't do what sort of seemed to happen on the doorstep on Friday.
She didn't take any responsibility.
And, colleagues lost their jobs, which is one element of it. But, actually, this expectation for this election was allowed to get completely out of control. When that happens, you end up in a mess. So I think what she'll do later is perhaps just show the contrition of the fact that some people have lost their parliamentary jobs for a general election, which wasn't strictly required, and I hope take some questions from colleagues. But I agree with you in the introduction. I don't think there's any great feeling that we want a urgent leadership election and getting right back into that, because I think, actually, to coin a phrase, genuinely what the country actually requires is a period of some stability, and so I think that a leadership election isn't the first thing that should be on the cards.
Were you surprised that she didn't show much contrition on the doorstep on Friday?
Yes.
What would you have liked to have heard from her?
Well, what she then said, I suppose, an hour or two later when there was a pool clip arranged, which is that colleagues had had lost their seats and majorities had been cut. And, quite clearly, just in human terms, this election didn't go to plan. I mean, the plan was to have a bigger majority and strengthen her hand at Brexit negotiations, which is fine, but it's not what actually ended up happening. So you expect any speech about it to at least acknowledge the fact that it hasn't gone that way. But as I say, I think she has then done a series of the right things. I thought she was right to move quickly to put the cabinet back in place. She dealt with the Downing Street advisors if she comes to the 22 this evening.
But she was forced to do that, wasn't she?
Well, by circumstances, of course. But, we are where we are with it. And you're asking me, do I think there'll be an immediate leadership election? My sense is no, particularly if the 22 goes well for her this evening.
If it doesn't go well, should there be a leadership contest?
Well, the thing about the situation as it exists is you would require, just on a technical note, 48 MPs, probably 15% of the party, 48 MPs to sign a letter.
At an emotional level and a personal level, I mean, you've just outlined. I mean, she didn't show contrition immediately on Friday. She went to the country because she wanted to get a stronger mandate, a bigger mandate. She made the whole campaign about her in a presidential style, promoted herself as strong and stable, and asked for a stronger mandate for Brexit. And it backfired catastrophically for her personally.
Yeah.
She lost her majority. The Tories have lost seats, as you have said, not gained them. You've gone backwards. And she was dubbed a Maybot in terms of her personal style. Does she not need to take more responsibility?
Well, I think not to acknowledge that was a mistake on Friday, and I hope that that's been recognised. The thing about Theresa May is she's actually, I think, quite good at being Prime Minister, which she's not good at all as at the campaigning, and that's what this election showed up. And what was crazy was to allow, and I thought this all along, I mean, being in the party chairman, so I thought about this long and hard, but, to allow expectations to run to the point where there was, May mania and we would get hundreds of seats and this, that was just crazy, insane. And by the way, just for the purpose of balance, exactly the same thing's happening now. Jeremy Corbyn's just lost this election. He has far fewer MPs than we do, only 4 more than their disastrous 2010 election.
And I'll come on to that, but
now
let's
we've got
stick
a
with the
sort of
Conservatives.
Corbyn mania. I mean, to stick to the main point, which is how these things get out of control. We now have a Corbyn mania, which is every bit as mad as having the May mania beforehand. Politics doesn't have to be done in this sort of febrile atmosphere, and it shouldn't be.
Do you think she'll fight another election as leader of the Conservative Party?
At this point, I really don't know. I suspect that she won't.
Do you think she'll last the year? I mean, will she make it to, and should she make it to the Tory party conference?
I think it would be great if she now gets the government in place, which she started to do yesterday, and starts these negotiations, and then she can then herself make any decisions about the future. I think it should be that way round, and I think the mood in the party is to allow for that time and space to do that. And as I say, what happens this evening at the 1922 will be vital to that, because she, I think, will need to give that sense that perhaps she hasn't always given in the past, that she gets it.
We can see some pictures of Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, confirmed back in post, denied that he's interested in the leadership, but here he is out running. You might say he's limbering up.
Look at that.
For
body waiting to... Look at that, amazing.
Yes, I'll look at it for a brief moment. Limbering up for a leadership election, getting himself in shape for the top job.
Well, he says not, and I think that's probably the truth for the time being.
Do you believe him?
I think right now, if he was going to do it, he would have already done it. I think what we're moving towards here, I mean, I'll give you my best assessment of the situation, having spoken to a lot of colleagues, is she now has a bit of time and space to get things back on something of an even keel. And with a working majority of 13, it is perfectly possible to do business. And actually, the big issue, I mean, we always like to say the Conservative Party is the party that puts the nation's interests first. And before Barry scoffs at that, you can look at things like the Scottish referendum, where at the time it certainly wasn't in our best interest to have the Scotland in the UK, but we still wanted to do that. And in the same spirit, right now, the most important thing is to have these Brexit negotiations actually begin. And so I think that's why we require this to kind of just calm down for the moment.
Barry Gardiner has been listening patiently. Why, though, Barry Gardiner, has your party been so happy about losing the election?
Well,
I have not been happy about losing the election. I don't think many people in my party have been happy that we lost.
Jeremy Corbyn looked delighted in the interviews yesterday. You thought he'd won.
What I think we have to be reasonably aware of is that we have turned what the broadsheets were saying was going to be 120 to 150 seat majority for the Conservatives into a reduced number of seats for the Conservatives, where they're now forming a minority administration in conjunction with the DUP.
So it was more successful than even you could have imagined, but you still lost.
Given where we were, we have achieved a historic resurgence. I'm pleased about that, but I'm conscious that there are many people out there in the country who were hoping for the policies that we put in our manifesto to be delivered, and that we have not done that is no solace to them.
Right, well, let's talk about the policies. Grant Shapps, which policies will be dropped from the manifesto because you didn't win a mandate for it?
Well, who knows? I mean, I can't
Which
give
ones
you
do
the
you
answers
think
to
should
that.
be dropped?
But I'll tell you one straight off the bat, absolutely insanity to start to talk about passing and changing fox hunting laws. What on earth was that about? It was the moment where I thought there'd just been a mistake made and perhaps an off-the-cuff comment, and then I read the manifesto and discovered that not only were we planning to allow a free vote, but it was also going to be on a government bill in a government time. This now stands absolutely no chance.
So self-inflicted.
And then thank goodness.
Right.
It's a silly idea.
What about the expansion of grammar schools?
Well, things like grammar schools, the future of education, I think social care, triple locks, all of those things I think will be in the mix with these discussions that will now have to take place.
Do you think they should be dropped in a sense that winter fuel payments being cut to a certain number of pensioners? Of course, we were never told who it was going to affect. The social care policy now with its cap as well as its floor, are you saying that shouldn't happen in your mind?
Well, I think things like the social care policy, you know, literally went down like a bucket of sick on the doorstep. I mean, nobody was interested in hearing the explanation, which actually, when you dug into the policy, we were raising this floor from 23 to £100,000 and actually would help some people in that. But no one was interested in getting into that detail. Actually, what it did was send a signal that we somehow weren't interested in the aspirations of people who work hard and save all their life and then want to actually be able to keep some of that money. People actually confused it with being about inheritance tax, which it's not. So, yeah, I think that policy needs to be shelved.
So, actually, the accusations that Labour had a magic money tree when it came to their manifesto, it'll be the Tories who will now go back on a lot of their manifesto commitments, and they won't commit to bringing down the deficit as in previous manifestos, and they will be spending money and giving out freebies.
I don't think that should and needs to be the case, or should be
Doesn't
the case. No, because we had, for example, on care...
But so many people voted for the Labour Party for a lot of those policies. I'm not saying for a magic money tree, I mean for spending more on public services.
It's also possible that quite a lot of people voted Labour to sort of show that they wanted to, like, you know, as people voted Brexit, thinking it would never happen, and probably voted that way as well. But I'll say this, on social care, for example, this is not, I'm not saying that there's endless amounts of money and that things did need to be done. We'd spent years with the economist Andrew Dilnot working out what to do on care. So there's a perfectly good and costed policy.
And you didn't do it.
Precisely.
And you didn't do it.
You and I are in agreement.
But how are you going to get your programme of legislation across? Why do we keep hearing that Jeremy Corbyn is going to have an alternative programme?
I don't want to intervene in the cosy chat that you've been having for the past quarter of an hour, but I do think there are some points that...
There's nothing cosy about it, Beauregard. No, I mean,
indeed,
taking him through what's happened over the election.
It's been a dialogue between the two of you, and if I can, comment on that. It seems to me that the real question that people need answered immediately is, what is the Queen's speech? Because she went to the country on a manifesto, most of the key policies of which she cannot deliver because she's now found them to be toxic. And so what is actually going to be in the Queen's speech? Nothing.
Well, that's hang on, but that's what we're discussing. So what I'm saying to you is, how are you going to get your policies into any sort of form that the public could then vote on? You lost the election. None of your manifesto promises are going to come into reality.
We're not in government,
right?
Absolutely. But
why does Jeremy Corbyn say he's going to offer an alternative programme for government? There isn't, is there, any prospect of you actually being able to do that?
What the official opposition is supposed to do in Parliament, precisely, is to put forward reasoned and reasonable alternatives and to make the case so that people can see, and ultimately in a parliament where actually things are so febrile and on a knife edge, where there is a real chance of the government losing a vote, then actually to be putting forward the reasonable alternative and trying to build a consensus around that.
On social care, what is your reasoned proposal that is going to be different to the government's?
Oh, well, we actually were in favour of the Dilnot report. We had bipartisan agreement about it until the Conservatives ripped that up. But more than that, we've said, for example, that we would be increasing the carers allowance by 17%. That's something which, again, was deeply popular. We would be restoring the £4.6 billion worth of cuts that the Conservatives made over the past 3 years. So there's a lot of difference there.
Right, well, then let's see. Do you think those are the sorts of things that now should be as part of the Tories' Queen's Speech?
Where I agree with Barry is we had cross-party agreement on the Andrew Dilnot care proposals, and that's what we should be absolutely doing. Where I disagree with Barry is not going back to the world that got us into the mess that we ended up with in the financial crash and have been trying to recover from ever since.
But you haven't won the election.
That was the housing market in the United States and Lehman Brothers, actually.
Let's face it, it was also spending 11%. Hold on, Barry. It was also spending 11% more than we were collecting in.
Grant Shapps, we are not going to go back now, in 2017, back to what happened in the financial crash. Labour have not been in power since 2010. The Conservatives have, under a coalition and under a majority government, and now no longer under a majority government.
Hold on, debt from 979 billion to 1,700 billion.
As you well know, as you're trying to mislead people about debt rather than the deficit, you can't reduce your debt, until you reduce and eliminate a deficit.
And you haven't done.
No, but the deficit was 11%, it's now 3%. And
but you did say you would eliminate it by 2015.
The policies that you're now proposing, Barry, beyond just the care thing, which we agree about, will take us right back into that deficit, which still isn't resolved.
All right, can I just ask about the DUP and the confidence and supply arrangement? Are you comfortable with that?
I don't want to be in government with them, and I don't want to be in coalition with them.
But are you comfortable in a confidence and supply?
I'm uncomfortable with many of their social views as well, and there are things that I could quite literally never, ever support. However, a party is entitled to vote for our economic programme, and I hope that an agreement can be made, a confidence and supply agreement can be made to do that. Are
you worried, Grant? Are you worried that actually the government has lost the capacity to hold the ring in the re-establishment of the Assembly in Northern Ireland? Because now they are seen to be in bed with one side, one party in that arrangement, and they can therefore no longer, in an impartial way, deal with both sides.
All right, let him just answer that straight question, and then I'll come with it.
It just comes with it, and that is, I think transparency is important here, and we need to know what has been offered to the DUP in order to gain their support, and the government is not saying that.
Well, hold on. First of all, the deal, as I understand it, is not actually done yet. So when it is done, I agree that it's very important that it's transparent. And to answer your question directly, yes, I actually do think that given that the DUP and the other parties want to get the power sharing going again, I don't think this is going to be an impediment to it in the way that you tried to suggest. I think that's throwing up a straw man. But as I say, I think that, if they want to agree with our economic programme, and if in return they want, for example, the long-term care stuff that we were just talking about shelved from the manifesto, then fine. Let them vote with our programme.
Were you uncomfortable when Gordon Brown was having talks with the DUP in 2010, when there was an attempt by Labour to form a coalition before the Tories and Liberal Democrats sealed the deal?
I've always said that if we are the largest single party, we should actually govern as a minority government. I believe it's the only honest way of doing things.
Which is what, of course, the Tories are going to try and do here.
Well, they're doing a deal. I've always said...
No, they're not doing it. It's a confidence and supply, which is what, of course, Gordon Brown would have done. Yeah. So were you uncomfortable with that?
Yes,
right.
Absolutely.
OK, so you wouldn't have done that then. Let's move on. The general election in Scotland told a rather different story to England and Wales. The Conservatives actually gained 12 seats. The Scottish Conservative leader, Ruth Davidson, seen here in the middle, being seen as the party's knight in shining armour. And yesterday, Miss Davidson, never shy of the cameras, staged a photo opportunity for the successful candidates. She's calling them her team. Labour were also successful, gaining 6 seats in Scotland, with the Lib Dems gaining 3. All of this at the expense of the SNP, who, if you can do your maths, lost 21 of their MPs. Well, joining me now is the SNP's Stephen Gethins. Welcome to the programme. It was a bad night for you.
Well, we did something that the Tories didn't manage to do and Labour didn't manage to do, which was to win a majority of the seats in which we stood.
But you lost seats?
Well, no, we did lose seats, and we lost some very, very good colleagues, some fine parliamentarians as well, and that was obviously disappointing, but we still managed to win the election in Scotland.
Right, but you went backwards, and Ruth Davidson coined the phrase peak Nat has been reached. Do you agree with her?
It was difficult to go much further forward on 95%
but you
of the seats.
You lost a lot of seats.
Sure, and look, we lost some very, very good colleagues, some excellent parliamentarians, and that was obviously disappointing.
Right.
And I'm disappointed to have lost fine parliamentarians like Mike Weir, Alex Salmond, Angus Robertson, Ailey Whiteford, people like that who have been provided tremendous assets to their constituency and also been very strong voices for Scotland.
Indie Ref 2 is dead, isn't it?
Well, that's a massive. I mean, that's something that the Scottish Parliament has voted on, so I'll leave that with the Scottish Parliament.
But in your mind, plans for a second independence
referendum,
referendum, which is what you campaigned on, a little more quietly, it has to be said, in this general election. But that's gone. You just haven't got the mandate for it now.
Well, you know, it was something I found astonishing during the general election campaign that we spent a lot of time with the Tories and others wanting to talk about independence rather than their records, because let's face it, I think where the Tories are at the moment, they had a poor record with where we are on Europe and jobs on the economy.
They did well in Scotland for someone with a poor record, didn't they?
Well, they did. I mean, they still lost the election in Scotland, but they made progress. There's no denying it, and they had some wins.
There are more Tory MPs in Scotland than pandas now, aren't there?
Well, there are more Tory MPs. That we're going to have to get some more pandas.
So you can still use that expression. But in terms of the independence referendum, you didn't want to talk about it because you knew in your heart of hearts that the people in Scotland just don't want it.
Well, I think we also wanted to talk about some of the big Westminster issues that we'll
like
need to decide on.
Like your record on education.
Well, actually, that's a Holyrood issue rather than a Westminster issue.
Well,
but we want to talk about Westminster issues like where are you going to get the funding from for public services? What's going to happen with austerity? There's direct impact on education in Scotland. What about Europe? And Barry made some interesting remarks earlier on about the movement we're going to have to see. And critically, something that's going to have to happen down here is that at Westminster it's going to have to change its culture. And for those of us at Westminster are going to have to try and talk to each other, find agreement where we can, and we can't find agreement everywhere, and try and work together, not least on Europe, where that'll be
right.
critical.
Well, let's talk about Europe, because you've called for, not you personally, but Nicola Sturgeon called for a Brexit pause.
Sure, yeah.
Isn't the truth that you just want to stop it?
Not at all. I think that if you look back, you'll see that the only government who provided anything of substance around what should happen next on Europe was a compromise that the Scottish Government released across the UK. Now, that was a pan-UK compromise. If that was rejected, there was also a Scottish element of that as well.
Well, it was rejected by the government at the time.
Single market, freedom of movement, EU nationals who have made this country their home and should be allowed to stay, universities and getting some kind of certainty for them, all these issues that are now open for discussion, and that's why we're asking for a pause. Now,
so you want to reopen the debate about the single market?
Well, you know, I'm somebody who thinks we should be members of the single market.
And but now you think that there is a...
We're asking for a pause for discussion. Now, given that Theresa May has just taken 6 critical weeks out of the negotiation period, I think a few days to reflect on the general election, accept that result, which the Tories still have to do, and have a discussion about what happens next.
Why? What gives the SNP the right and the basis to dictate what should happen now in terms of Brexit? Because you lost seats.
Well, I'm sorry to say, Joe, but I think you're falling back in that old Westminster habit of saying that one party dictates. These are policy suggestions that we're open to discussing with members of other political parties.
But they've agreed, these two.
These
two have agreed ostensibly on Brexit in terms of single market membership and customs union membership. They want out.
I'll be surprised if the Labour Party are going to let the Tories off the hook quite that easily. I think what we need to do...
Because you think Labour might be on your side with the single market?
Well, I think there are a large number of areas where we can find common ground with colleagues in the Labour Party. We've not been on issues like freedom of movement, on the single market, on issues that have a direct impact on jobs in the economy and opportunities for young people.
Right. I mean, ironically, of course, you could work with Ruth Davidson, couldn't you? She also wants to perhaps have an open discussion, she says, on Brexit and some of the areas around it. You could obviously join with her.
Look, if I can find common ground in issues that I think will be a benefit to my constituents on these issues, then of course you'd work together with members of other political parties. Now, look, in this Parliament, we will all have to get used to talking to one another, to listening to one another as well. Gone are the days when the Tories can get about a third of the vote and then command a majority. Those days have clearly gone now. Right. And in Holyrood, this is something that's happened for years now, and Westminster is going to have to get a bit more used to it.
How long do you want the talks to pause for?
I think a few days until we can have
only a
some
few days.
time. Well, I mean, let's see how long it takes, because I think that we need to reflect on the election result. I think that the Tory hard Brexit is finished, and that we need to start listening to people from other political parties, get the devolved administrations involved, which was not happening previously.
Right. Well, should they? Should the devolved administrations be involved? Ruth Davidson obviously clearly wants to have more involvement, and she has got some basis for flexing her muscles. What about bringing in the SNP? What about bringing in Labour in a more cross-party committee, other than a select committee which already exists on Brexit, to talk about it?
I think it is a good idea to build consensus, like almost always in politics, and I'm actually fascinated to hear it from the SNP. I used to stand for PMQs just next to Angus Robertson, where he sat, and the banter, he backwards and forwards. He was the most tribal of politicians I ever used to come across.
So is that going to stop?
It was unbelievable.
He was holding Theresa May to account in a way that Jeremy Corbyn
that is true too.
I
But as a group,
okay.
I don't think there were a more tribal group of MPs than the SNP.
Right.
So to
But
hear
I'm
you
asking,
talk
can you
about
walk?
cross-party
Can you work?
cooperation is amazing,
Do you know something?
and welcome, actually.
In the last Parliament, I was able, if you go back and look at the motions that I put down, my amendments that I put down on the European issue, I was able to get support from Labour, even some Tories.
I think I mean more in...
David Davis even backed my call for the referendum date.
I mean more in sort of attitude and approach towards other colleagues in the House than anything else.
I'm not sure.
Where's the common ground between you, very briefly?
Can I just point out that one of the key aspects where there is real disagreement on Brexit is over regulation or deregulation. The Conservatives want a deregulated economy, and in order to be able to continue to have the access of which Grant speaks, but which his party has difficulty to negotiate because of their view on regulation, we actually need to have equivalence with the EU.
Will you vote down the Great Repeal Bill?
We've already said that we will vote down the Great Repeal Bill because we want to have an EU rights and protections bill. This is exactly that area of regulation and standards.
And you would support
They want
that,
to do
obviously.
away with the regulations that we are actually providing us with protection for our clean air, environmental protection, the Birds and Habitats Directive, something that the new Secretary of State, something that the new Secretary of State for Environment,
who is Michael Gove.
Michael Gove, he's
friend of
already
yours.
said that he's against the Habitats Directive.
Clear, because
you know something?
Guys, if you all talk over each other, no one can hear. You have one word.
Viewers would be misled by this conversation. The Great Repeal Bill actually seeks to take all European legislation and put it into British law wholesale, and in particular protect workers' rights and environmental.
We have to end it there because we have to let Stephen Gethins go.
Thank
you. You won by 2 votes, didn't you?
Yes.
My goodness.
They all count. I think that's the thing to take away. Every vote counts, every constituency.
So you're hanging on here. Who will replace Angus Robertson as your leader in Westminster?
Well, that's a discussion that we need to have over the next few days. I think quite rightly everybody's taken a weekend, as they should, to relax, spend a bit of time with family and maybe sleep a little bit as well.
Yeah, it's quite a good idea. Stephen Gethins, thank you. So much for the campaign. Let's get back into the here and now and speak to 2 people who use the notebook and pen rather than the camera to tell their stories. Sam Coates of The Times and Jack Blanchard of The Mirror. Welcome to both of you. So, here we are. Sam Coates, first of all, your reflections today. If we look about the Cabinet, we've got the 1922 committee meeting. She's going to have to address her own MPs. What's that going to be like for her?
Well, look, undoubtedly it's going to be quite sticky. But look, I think there's one sort of driving force underneath everything that's going on at the moment. Over the weekend, the Conservative Party, Tory MPs, took a look at Theresa May and basically decided that a bad Prime Minister is better than no Prime Minister. They decided they didn't want a leadership contest because it might just destabilise a Prime Minister hanging by a thread even more and lead to a general election. Why don't they want a general election? Because they're worried that Labour might do even better and yet more Tory MPs might lose seats, possibly propelling Jeremy Corbyn into Downing Street. So that's a no-no for the Conservative Party. So however sticky it is, and it will be sticky, they are basically setting, I suspect, quite a low bar for Theresa May this afternoon, and they will complain, but they just want to make sure she looks like she functions as a Prime Minister for now, while they work out what on earth to do with the legislative programme, with the country, with Brexit, and with that manifesto that was so palpably unpopular.
But there are challenges, aren't there, to functioning, to use your word, as a Prime Minister, Jack Blanchard. Over the weekend there was confusion about whether there had been a deal with the DUP, and in fact the DUP said there hadn't been, even though it had been briefed out. It was corrected by Michael Fallon. Today we were expecting the Queen's speech on a certain particular date, and now it looks as if that's been delayed. So are we already seeing difficulties here to hold it together?
You bet we are. I mean, we have got a Prime Minister who spent 7 weeks warning the nation about a coalition of chaos that would happen if Jeremy Corbyn was voted into power. And look what happens. 2 days after the election, she is the one at the helm of a coalition of chaos. She's been unable to strike a deal with the DUP so far. The Queen's speech has now been delayed, we're hearing. We don't know if the Brexit talks are going to start on time. Literally, the government is floundering around and it doesn't know what to do. It's exactly all the things that she was scaremongering about before the election have now come to pass, but with her at the helm.
So how long do you think she'll survive then, Sam Coates?
Well, look, I think given the centre of gravity in the Conservative Party, I think it's going to be months rather than weeks. But you've got to think of Theresa May's predicament as incredibly insecure. She's effectively got 2 coalitions within her own party that she's got to manage. She's got the DUP, and those negotiations are ongoing. But also now, separately, she's got the 13 MPs that are under the auspices of Ruth Davidson. So you've got a socially conservative wing that she's got to please and a socially liberal wing that she's got to keep all of these forces together in order just to get through the Queen's speech. That looks pretty tricky. I don't think necessarily that the delay of the Queen's speech is a sign that there's a crisis, but she does need to get a deal with both sides that keeps everybody happy. And I think in the end, the thing that's going to trip her up is legislation and what happens in the House of Commons.
Let's talk about Labour, Jack Blanchard. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn is feeling jubilant, even though Labour lost the election. And there is a sense that there may be discussions on Brexit and in terms... John McDonnell was very clear about coming out of the single market, but do you think there are potential problems for that line within Labour?
I think there could be, but they're trying to keep it as vague as possible, because the minute that they pin themselves down too firmly, the same divisions that we're seeing within the Conservative Party will start to open up within Labour as well. But you've got to remember, Jeremy Corbyn is riding sky high at the moment. Nobody thought he was going to pull off this election.
And no one's going to challenge him.
No, exactly. So that, you know, if John McDonnell says something right now, it goes. But I do think there's a bit of nuance there within Labour's position in terms of access to the single market. What does that actually mean compared with membership of a reformed single market? These terms are actually quite vague, and I think Labour will be able to sort of fudge it, at least for now.
All right, both of you, just very briefly, does it matter who the paper's back anymore in elections?
I think we offer strong and stable coverage of everybody.
Well done, Sam. I'm not sure that phrase may be used again in future elections. Jack, you?
I think it's not very often that the Mirror chalks up what it can call a win, and I think we'll take this one. Thank you very much.
You're always a winner, Jack.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I'll leave on a high then for the both of you. Thank you.
I've been getting away with it all